WADR, promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar and 1 p.m. in Abuja. Good afternoon and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and worldwide on wadr.org. Welcome to Newslink. Here are the top stories. Nigeria's defense headquarters confirms the emergence of a new terrorist group operating in the country's northwest.
It is indeed the first attempt of the Sahelian jihadists to have a foothold in our country. They were kept at bay all this while when we had joint cross-border operations.
The Confederation of Sahel States, AES, establishes a joint strategy to combat insecurity within their region. And Guinea launches campaign to popularize new draft constitution.
Today marks the beginning of the largest ever campaign undertaken in an African country to promote a constitutional text. The Guinean model has been endorsed by the Inter-Parliamentary Union as an example for all countries in transition and those undertaking constitutional reforms.
And the ECOWAS Court of Justice delivers landmark ruling against the Sierra Leonean government over discriminatory loitering laws. Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
Here is Abdullahi Hassan with Newslink.
Many thanks for staying with us, and many thanks to you, our listeners, for joining us across West Africa and beyond. Let's begin in Nigeria, where the defense headquarters has confirmed the rise of a new terrorist group known as Lukarawas operating in the country's northwest. Major General Edward Buba, Director of Defense Media Operations, disclosed the group's emergence following disruptions in military relations between Nigeria and Niger after a recent coup in Niamey. From Abuja, WADR's Usman Omar reports.
During a news conference to update newsmen on the activities of the armed forces, General Buba disclosed that the new terror group, the Lukarawas, reportedly infiltrated Nigeria's Sokoto and Kebbi states from Niger and Mali, exploiting gaps in regional security cooperation.
It is indeed the first attempt of the Sahelian jihadists to have a foothold in our country. They were kept at bay all this while when we had joint cross-border operations with the Republic of Niger. However, when the coup took place in Niger, they took advantage of the breakdown in cooperation between both countries, which has now been restored. We know exactly where they are.
According to Buba, locals initially welcomed the group, unaware of its intentions. The defense headquarters, however, assured that military forces are conducting surveillance intelligence operations to counter the threat. The Nigeria Police Force also confirmed that the group, heavily armed, is active in several local government areas, including Gudu, Tangaza, and Binji in Sokoto State, imposing its ideology on residents. Speaking on the demise of Major General Taurid Lagbaja, Nigeria's 27th Chief of Army Staff, who passed away earlier in the week, General Buba assured that the armed forces are more than ever determined to continue to fight against all threats to national peace and sovereignty, even as they mourn the late Chief of Army Staff.
I know clearly that citizens understand that we are fighting a war against terrorists and insurgents. In this war, we must also understand that in spite of our loss, and a great loss in these circumstances, we have no option but to continue fighting these terrorists.
For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
Still on security, the Confederation of Sahel States, AES, have established a joint strategy to combat insecurity within their region. This plan was approved by the Malian Transitional President, General Assimi Goïta, who doubles as the current president of the AES. The joint security strategy was developed by security experts and chiefs of defense staff from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, who are members of this alliance. They met over 3 days in Bamako, the Malian capital. Ogeberika has the rest of the details.
In the final document provided by General Goita, key priorities include improving coordination of joint military operations to strengthen the impact of armed forces in areas most vulnerable to terrorist incursions. The chiefs of defense staff from the three countries agreed on the need to address logistical issues promptly to improve the effectiveness of joint operations. The forces also need to adapt to the evolving terrorist threats in the Sahel. The strategy calls for increased efforts to enhance the operational capacities of each country's forces with a focus on better intermilitary coordination. The military leaders emphasized the importance of a quick response in emergency security situations. A joint command center for AES operations could be established in the near future. This new strategy marks a pivotal step in organizing military operations for AES forces according to the three delegations. It now serves as a roadmap for a coordinated response to regional security threats, said Niger's Chief of Armed Forces. He added that it will reinforce the pooling of military resources, joint operations, and intelligence sharing among the three countries.
Ogebirika with that report. Away from security matters, turmoil continues in Ghana's parliament as the opposition National Democratic Congress NDC caucus has criticized counterparts from the ruling New Patriotic Party NPP for failing to attend the session despite initiating a recall of the House. Due to the absence of NPP MPs and the lack of an agenda, the Speaker of Parliament, Alba Bangbin, adjourned the session. On the other hand, the NPP caucus has accused the Speaker of allowing disorder in the House, alleging that he is enabling lawlessness by the NDC MPs who insist they are the majority and occupied the right hand of the Speaker when the House reconvened. The NPP MPs have served notice to trigger another recall of Parliament. From Accra, Nadiri Tete reports.
Ghana's Speaker of Parliament, Alban Bagbin, was forced to adjourn the House indefinitely on Thursday, citing the absence of the NPP MPs and the lack of an agenda for members to discuss. The session, which had been called by the governing NPP caucus, was intended to address several pressing matters.
It is not advisable to be adjourning from day to day, and so I'll proceed once more to adjourn the meeting indefinitely.
Leader of the NDC caucus, Dr. Kasiela Toforson, expressed disappointment in the NPP caucus for failing to show up for parliamentary business. He stated that Ghanaians should hold the NPP accountable for their actions, accusing the NPP MPs of causing financial loss to the state.
The NPP minority caucus have indeed caused financial loss to the state and to us, the NDC members of parliament, and to the people of Ghana. We say this because this recalls cost Ghana money. This is not the first time that they have done this, but we see nothing than disrespect. We call on the people of Ghana to see the behavior of the NPP.
On the other hand, the NPP caucus has accused the Speaker, Alban Bagbin, of allowing disorder in the House, alleging that he is enabling, quote, lawlessness by the NDC MPs who insist they are the majority side and took the right-hand seats of the Speaker when the House reconvened.
We recall Parliament. He has come to illegally adjourn Parliament without engaging us, knowing that there was chaos in the chamber, and he knew that the right thing to do was to engage us and to get the NDC to sit on his left. He refused to do that. So we would compare Parliament to sit, and for the right government business to be transacted. We are going to do it. We will not allow the Speaker to have his way. He's not a member of Parliament.
It remains to be seen in the coming days how this apparent standoff will be resolved. For WADR, Nadiri Tete, Accra.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Remember, we're live on YouTube at WADR News and on Facebook at WADR English Service. Now, a group of concerned citizens known as the Coalition of Progressive Gambians organized a peaceful protest on Thursday to express their strong opposition to the 2024 draft constitution. The protesters began their march at Bond Road and made their way to the National Assembly in Banjul, calling for the return of the 2020 draft constitution, which they believe reflects the true wishes and aspirations of the Gambian people. Sankuli Jankwen Banjul tells us more.
The group argues that the 2020 draft constitution, developed after extensive consultations and national discourse, encapsulates the core values and democratic principles desired by the citizens of the Gambia. Celestine Kujabi is the Secretary General of the Coalition of Progressive Gambians.
The COPD is convicted that the 2020 draft constitution is the constitution of the people and the constitution they want. It is the voice of the people and set of principles we want to be governed with through personal integrity and national sovereignty.
They contend that the 2024 draft, which has since been presented to the National Assembly, falls short of addressing these aspirations and includes provisions that are not in the best interest of the country's future.
We were disappointed by the unconstitutional move by the executive and the Minister of Justice, who amended and omitted some of the provisions and enshrined clauses of the 2020 draft without proper consultation in respect for the voice and choice of Gambians. The removal of the clause for specification of the appointment of the Chief Justice and judicial judges are deemed a gross negligence of the principles of the separation of powers and therefore undermines any credible and reliable good governance.
Meanwhile, Dr. Bai Beranjai, a protester, has this to say.
We want the 2020 draft, not the 2024 draft. I call it Barrow's draft. That draft to me is equally dictatorial as that of Constitution of 1997.
As they marched towards the parliament, the protesters held placards reading, "Return the 2020 draft and reject the 2024 draft." Their demands were straightforward. They urged lawmakers to reject the current draft constitution in favor of the 2020 version, which they believe offers a stronger foundation for a democratic and just for the Gambia. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I'm Sankuli Jenko reporting from Banjul.
Guinea has begun a national campaign to raise awareness of the draft new constitution. For the next 30 days, advisors and parliamentary officials will travel across regions, prefectures, sub-prefectures and urban areas to discuss the contents of the proposed constitution with citizens. The launch event on Thursday at the People's Palace in Conakry gathered government officials, junta members, political party representatives and the diplomatic community accredited in Guinea. Augustine Colley has won this report.
A team of 142 agents, including members of the Transitional Parliament and advisors, will tour the country to explain the Constitution's contents, which will eventually be put to a referendum, and to gather public feedback. Here is President of the Transitional Parliament, Dan Sakuruma.
Today marks the beginning of the largest ever campaign undertaken in an African country to promote a constitutional text. The Guinean model has been endorsed by the Inter-Parliamentary Union as an example for all countries in transition and those undertaking constitutional reforms.
This draft constitution, set for a referendum, has already sparked criticism from some political actors and civil society organizations who argue that it does not meet the current aspirations of Guineans. However, the President of the Transitional Parliament has denied these claims.
The President of the Republic has expressed to the people of Guinea his commitment to provide the country with a constitution that reflects our identity and unites us. This means a constitution that will address the legitimate aspirations of the Guinean people who have endured decades of constitutional changes and institutional instability. The constitution aims to pave the way forward by clearly defining the type of republic and institutions we envision for our country.
Originally expected to be voted on by the end of 2024, the constitutional referendum is now scheduled for 2025, when Guineans will go to the polls to decide on the new constitution.
A report filed in by WADR's Conakry correspondent General Alpha Ibrahima Balde and voiced in our studios by Augustine Colley. Let's turn our attention to labor agitations in Liberia, where tension is building up at the National Election Commission as employees demand accountability, transparency in budget handling amidst unpaid benefit. We're growing discontent within the National Elections Commission. About 300 employees have come together to demand immediate action on budget transparency in line with the Commission's current resolution for outstanding benefits, including hazard allowances, insurance benefits, and other financial needs stemming from the 2023 general and presidential elections. From Monrovia, Grace Joshua has more.
The workers are calling for an immediate proposal to ensure that leftover funds from the recent general election are directed towards addressing pressing issues affecting them. The resolution notes that the amount in question is USD 8 million, reportedly left over from the 2023 election. Chairperson Lassana has pledged that the money will be returned to the Liberian government. The Board of Commissioners, chaired by Madame Devietta Brown Lassana, is being urged to address key financial concerns. Workers claimed that USD 2 million of the remaining fund intended for staff benefit were deducted without explanation, raising concern about the fund whereabouts.
How money for us, you don't want to give our money. I escorted the election material to Nigeria and Romondo Bar for 8 hours. I'm supposed to be entitled to insurance, my allowances, and she won't pass away. We are not going to get tired until we get the money.
Despite promises of payment, employees are still awaiting compensation and insurance coverage months after the elections. For West Africa Democracy Radio, I'm Grace Joshua in Monrovia.
You are listening to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal, and online on wadr.org. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Nigeria's defense headquarters confirms the emergence of a new terrorist group operating in the country's northwest. The Confederation of Sahel States establishes a joint strategy to combat insecurity within their region. Guinea launches campaign to popularize a new draft constitution. And ahead in the news, the ECOWAS Court of Justice delivers a landmark ruling against the Sierra Leone government over discriminatory lettering laws. We also have the guest interview and sports news. Please stay with us.
You are listening to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal.
Many thanks for staying with us. The ECOWAS Court of Justice has, in a landmark decision, ruled that Sierra Leone's lettering laws are discriminatory, following a case filed by a rights organization Advo-Aid. The court determined that these laws unfairly target poor and vulnerable people, violating fundamental human rights. This ruling not only demands reform in Sierra Leone, but also sets a strong precedent across West Africa for addressing laws that criminalize poverty. Christopher Tichu completes the story.
Under Sierra Leone's Public Order Act 1964 and the Summary Conviction Offences Ordinance of 1906, individuals can be detained based on a subjective police assessment, often leading to arbitrary arrest of low-income individuals. In a case brought by the non-profit organization Advo-Aid, these colonial-era laws were challenged for unfairly targeting marginalized communities, violating rights of equality, non-discrimination, and freedom of movement. Advo-Aid highlighted the severe impact of these laws on women, with reports of some being coerced into non-consensual acts by officers when unable to pay bribes. The ECOWAS Community Court of Justice has now declared Sierra Leone's loitering laws discriminatory, ordering the government to amend or repeal them. This ruling is viewed as a significant step in addressing systemic inequalities and protecting the rights of vulnerable groups. Here is Juliet Mama Wakaikai, legal manager for Advo-Aid.
It sets a precedent for other countries across Africa, many of which still enforce similar colonial-era laws that criminalize poverty and unfairly target vulnerable persons.
Advo-Aid received support from the Institute for Human Rights and Development in Africa, IHRDA, and the campaign to decriminalize poverty and status. Both Advo-Aid and IHRDA are confident that the government of Sierra Leone would respect the ECOWAS ruling. Juliet Mama Wakaikai again.
The decision is indeed binding on member states, which of course includes Sierra Leone. Although challenges remain with enforcement, we're optimistic that the Sierra Leonean government will comply.
A revision of Sierra Leone's loitering laws following this ECOWAS judgment is expected to create a fairer legal framework that respects the dignity and rights of all citizens.
Christopher Atichu with that report. And in news beyond West Africa, Gabon, a coast state in Central Africa, on Thursday kicked off a campaign for the country's constitutional referendum and will run until Friday, November 15. On Saturday, November 16, Gabonese citizens will vote to approve or reject the draft new constitution. The proposed constitution introduces several key changes, including a shift from a semi-presidential to a fully presidential system, a cap on presidential terms to a maximum of 2 consecutive terms, and recognition of French as a working language. This referendum is significant as it marks the first election since the August 30, 2023 coup that ended the Bongo dynasty of father and son rule. Prime Minister Raymond Ndong-Sima, who is overseeing national coordination of the 2024 constitutional referendum, says that the country cannot remain indefinitely in a transitional phase. Other provisions in the draft constitution include the requirement that presidential candidates must have at least one Gabonese parent and the prohibition of the spouse and descendants of a president from running for succession. Additionally, as part of measures designed to prevent a return to authoritarian rule, presidential terms will be limited to 7 years.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
This segment of the news takes us to Mali, where a few days ago, the Transitional Parliament passed a law penalizing descent-based slavery. The phenomenon is still rife in many parts of the country. It is a practice that runs counter to human rights, subjecting one person to compulsory subordination to another. It often arouses indignation, but without any real judicial response. With the adoption of this new law, the authorities now want to fight effectively against this practice. It is a victory for the movement for the safeguard of human rights in Mali, which campaigns against descent-based slavery. Boubacar Jem is head of the movement.
This decision of the Mali government is a very important and symbolic step in the fight against discrimination and inhumane practices. It shows a strong position against the caste system that maintains certain populations in subordination situations that have been avoided. By officially penalizing this form of slavery, the government sends a clear message that these practices are no longer tolerable in Mali.
Do you think this will dissuade those who still value these practices?
A criminal law, a judicial law, still has the potential to dissuade, but it will not always be enough to eradicate this practice. For example, in some communities, slavery by assassination is very rooted in ancient traditions and beliefs. That's the problem, and it is possible that these individuals persist either by adherence to this law or by conviction. So the problem is that the law always has a decisive effect. Now, the fact of practicing it, there is a lot of effort of communication through local media, the authorities, the local civil society, the Malian civil society.
Now, what is the surest way to go with the fight against these practices? You said earlier that the law may not be enough on its own.
By sensitization, by effort to strengthen their capacities, whether at the level of judicial authorities and also the victims of slavery, and then the people, that is, the notables, the chiefs, the village heads who still support this phenomenon. So we really have to emphasize our efforts to raise awareness, to communicate through these actors, to allow them to assimilate this law that has just been adopted by the National Council for Transition. It is mainly through these efforts. The legislation is a first step, but it is far from bringing together all the local sensitivities. For them, it is a custom, a social classification, so that it is being repressed by judicial actions, by a law, can create a crack at the social level. So all of this, we need to accentuate our communications and show that the law is not made to remove social sensibilities. On the contrary, the law is there to reinforce customs, the customs and the social classifications.
How can this law be accepted by the population? Because you said also that it is a very rooted cultural fact in some parts of the country.
Il y a quand même l'éducation et la sensibilisation qu'on doit accentuer.
Some might think that we are affecting their culture and how to make this law accepted by the population. There is still education and awareness that we must emphasize. Invest in education programs on human rights from an early age to change the mentality in the long term. This means working with religious and community leaders to spread this value of equality and dignity. We also have community mediation, which means community mediation involving community leaders, religious leaders, opinion leaders to continue to help us, that is, to help civil society organizations, to help NGOs to spread the message carried by this law. So community mediation is crucial to initiate a frank dialogue and promote an interpretation of the traditions that respect human rights. So after all this sensitization, mediation, we can apply. We can go to a strict application of the law. Because we can't apply this law directly like that without making efforts of communication, sensitization, education and mediation in this law.
Et de médiation dans cette loi.
Boubacar Jim, the head of Safeguard of Human Rights in Mali. Up next is Sport News with Sankule Janko.
Hello there, a warm welcome and thank you for joining us. Nigeria international Victor Osimhen scored a brace to help Galatasaray beat Tottenham Hotspur 3-2 in a thrilling encounter in the Europa League on Thursday night. The Super Eagles forward, who is on loan at the Turkish club from Napoli, scored 2 first-half goals to cap off a brilliant performance. Osimhen added Galatasaray's lead 31 minutes after Yunus Agun had given them the lead. The reigning African Player of the Year, Osimhen scored his second just minutes before half-time to seal the win. The English Premier League side Spurs scored 2 second-half goals to reduce the deficit, but it was too little, too late, as it ended 3-2 in favour of Galatasaray. It was a brilliant night for another African, as Ivory Coast international Ahmed Diallo inspired Manchester United to a 2-0 win against Greece side PAOK on Thursday night in Old Trafford, Manchester. Diallo scored a brace to help Manchester United register their first win in Europe this season. The Ivorian winger scored 10 minutes into the second half before adding his tally in the 77th minute to put the game to bed. Ahmad is gradually settling well in Manchester following loan spells in the past. It is reported that Manchester United are willing to reward him with a new contract that will see his wages tripled. And a pre-Olympic youth basketball tournament is set to kick off today in the Senegalese capital, Dakar. The youth basketball tournament will be staged among 5 countries, namely host Senegal, Gambia, Nigeria, Algeria and Kenya. And that's it for sports. It's back to you.
And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Krista Mukidi and Maojo Juve for the technical support. Do interact with us via social media platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram at WADR News, on Facebook, WADR English Service, and stream live on WADR.org. Do join Demba Amaran at 1 p.m. for the second edition of our comprehensive news package in French, Info Chez Vous. I'm Abdullahi Hassan. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM, Newmi FM 94.0,
Hilltop Radio 104.7 FM,
and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM, Lofa County,
Radio Kagama 94.5 FM, Niba County, DCN Radio 91.3 FM, Riverside County, Wakat FM Radio, Banga, Liberia, Radio Baf FM 91.3 Sierra Leone.
For you listening via Radio Pad 95.1 Damango, Savannah region, and on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi, Ghana, we say a big thank you. Remember, West Africa Democracy Radio is all about you, your views, and your opinions.
Campaigns are on for the parliamentary elections in Senegal. This November 17, millions of Senegalese will be choosing their local representatives in what will be a keen contest. Join us on West Africa Democracy Radio this Wednesday, 13th of November, for a debate on the future of parliamentary democracy in Senegal. Join political experts, civil society players, and other informed observers of parliamentary democracy in Senegal for the debate. Keep a date with us this Wednesday, 13th November 2024, starting 2 p.m. in English and 3 p.m. in French. This will be a cyber broadcast on 94.9 FM, wadr.org, and on our social media platforms, Facebook and YouTube channel. Be part of history and let your voice be heard. You can call us live or even send a WhatsApp message on 781-845-421. West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM Dakar, your home for dialogue.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
Your current affairs program, Citizens Hour, is now more inclusive, more educative, and brings you a broader perspective on political and governance matters. This quarter on Citizens Hour, we spotlight issues on democracy, civic education, women and youth participation in governance, and other policy issues. Every Saturday, starting at 10 a.m. and a repeat broadcast at 6 p.m. on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM Dakar. Also, don't miss our special monthly debate, which comes up every last Saturday of the month on trending political and governance issues in the sub-region. Citizens Hour on West Africa Democracy Radio. It's your time to speak.
La désinformation ne doit pas passer par moi, car une fausse information peut détruire